Now, the Debt Management Office, in an update posted on its website, says the country's debt portfolio rose to about 25.7 trillion naira as of June 30 this year. Now, with the latest plan to borrow another 1.92 trillion naira in 2020, Nigeria's debt profile would have risen over by 128% in 5 years, from 12.12 trillion naira on June 30, 2015 to about 27.62 trillion naira on June 30 this year. Now, this has generated worry by some concerned experts. Correspondent Kelly Giga tells us more.
The federal government's plan to borrow an additional 1.92 trillion naira in 2020 will take Nigeria's total public debt portfolio to about 27.62 trillion naira, an additional 15.5 trillion naira borrowed since the first swearing-in of the Muhammadu Buhari administration 4 years ago. In the 2020 appropriation bill presented to the National Assembly last week, President Muhammadu Buhari said his government will take new loans during the year. But in an exclusive interview with a financial analyst, Yomi Olugberu, he expresses worry, especially with close reference to the 2020 budget proposal.
Everyone is worried because if you look at the quantum of the debts, if you look at how much is going into debt servicing, and if you look at what our revenue profile look like, you know that we're at a time that we really need to take a deep breath and look at what we're doing. As at mid-year, this year, 2019, as at 30th of June, from a revenue profile, Nigeria is like 42%, the federal government is like 42% behind budget. We've made just about just a little above 2 trillion naira in terms of revenue, and our debt servicing alone has got to well over 1 trillion naira. Over the past years in Nigeria, and I'm not talking this administration, there's a significant proportion of our borrowing that has gone into, just paying salaries and overhead. So that's not good enough. That's a cause for worry. Then the other is in your capacity to finance the debt. So if you borrow and you don't have enough revenue to be able to service the debt, then you are in deep crisis. So that's where Nigeria seems to be sitting, on a very narrow path.
Meanwhile, the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, during the public presentation of the details of the budget, said the borrowings would come from domestic and external sources. She said about 745 billion naira would be expected from domestic lenders, while about 850 billion naira would come from foreign borrowings. But why does the country need to borrow?
You borrow when you have gaps in your revenue. So we all know the amount of infrastructural deficit that this country has got. If you look at the revenue of the federal government, for example, for starters, once you take away the bureaucracy financing, the recurrent expenditure, paying personnel costs and paying our overheads, you realize that only very little is left to be able to deliver the infrastructure, the road, the rail, the power, and all of that. So if you really need to jumpstart the economy, which the country actually needs, if you really need to finance the infrastructure deficit that we're talking about, from rail to road to power, you realize that we can't really achieve so much if we're focusing only on our internally generated revenue. Our tax to GDP is roughly around 6%.
In the meantime, of the total debt portfolio, the federal government accounts for 79%, about 20.4 trillion naira of the 25.7 trillion naira outlay. This consists of external 7.02 trillion naira and domestic 13.97 trillion naira. Also, the state and the federal capital territory account for about 5.28 trillion naira, consisting of external at 1.31 trillion naira and domestic at 3.97 trillion naira. Olugberu, among other things, calls for a reorganization of the government's architecture.
There's so much that can be done. I think the entire architecture of the government at this point that we are require a reorganization, reworking. Some people will call it restructuring or whatever, but it's quite simple. I work with large corporates, so when corporates are going through this kind of crisis, you look at issue from almost every angle possible. As much as you're trying to grow the top line, which the government is trying to do by identifying new revenue sources, you also look at these outflow sources.
Despite growing concerns by Nigerians home and abroad, the government has insisted its debt to gross domestic product is not only one of the lowest among its peers, but also within an acceptable threshold. However, the International Monetary Fund (IMF) has continued to criticize the country's debt to GDP ratio as low, saying it can hardly guarantee the risk in the event of a global economic downturn. Kelly